concepts we developed to try and think about the role of users or agents, such as interpretive flexibility and domestication, which Roger Silverstone and Leslie Haddon have developed, and Leslie's been using, I think, very productively in the last years. I think there were very good ways of thinking about the differing meanings that the same technology can afford, but I don't think that they were really about communication as such. And I think the temptation then is to render the symbolic configurations as somehow less material than their material form. To put it bluntly, I think STS concepts are better at dealing with hardware than software, and they were much better at speaking about ICTs as technologies rather than to their symbolic or communicative content. It is terribly hot in here, I'm just going to see you're all doing this. It's muddy hot in here. Now, the typical way out of this dilemma, as we all know, is to stress the mutually constitutive relationship between these concepts. This is what we always do, and it's a relationality that avoids determinism. But I wonder if the problem is really with how these debates have been framed. And what I mean by that is that I think often the STS sort of media studies divide is a divide that's and a debate around technology rather than technoscience. And that what that loses is our broader notion of technoscience that would encompass all our thinking about science and technology as forms of knowledge production, and even more crucially, as forming and informing culture. And I mean, two of the journals that I was, well, one journal I was on the editorial board, but the other one I sort of read actually very early on when I was getting into STS, was Science as Culture and Technology as Culture. And I think it's kind of often forgotten that that the cultural analysis goes right back to the kind of beginnings of STS. Now, I think it is true to say that in recent years we have been spending a lot of time fine-tuning our notions of materiality, and there's been a lot of discussion about materiality, people like John Law and others, and amongst feminists that are wider audience, Karen Barad's work is now highly cited. I think the title, the subtitle, How Matter Comes to Matter, was, superb, and there's been a lot of interest in that work. And the question then would be, of course, whether this focus on materiality is a strength or a weakness. And I would very much argue that it's a kind of great strength over standard media studies. Now, you only have to think back to the classic media scholar Marshall McLuhan, who was famously uninterested in the social design of technologies. For him, the medium is the message. Now, I know that McLuhan has often, too often really, served as a deterministic punching bag, and that most media scholars now really hover between a kind of soft technological determinism and soft social shaping. But I think it's also true to say that communication scholars generally have been concerned with consumption and reception rather than with the constitutive role of artefacts in social relations. And I think our appeal to communication scholars is precisely the way we treat agency as the product of ongoing socio-material practices. And I think that hanging on to this notion of agency is really key for a rigorous analysis of ICTs. And I think without this, it's very hard to kind of puncture the huge amount of kind of enthusiasm and writing there is about the new freedoms afforded by the internet, virtual worlds, and so on. I want to end by mentioning a book that some of you will have read, and I think many of you will have heard of, by Jonathan Zittrain, called The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It. And it's already being claimed by many people as kind of the classic book on the internet. Now, it is a fantastic book, but I think Jonathan's book would have been much better if he'd read some STS, and I did try when we were together at the Oxford Internet Institute, unsuccessfully, to give him some. My proselytising had no effect on him, but he is a Harvard person, after all. Now, Zittrain is very interested in technological design. That's what I think is so interesting about the book. Indeed, the book is really an argument for preserving the inherently generative capacity of network PCs and the web. That's, it's a passionate plea for the preservation of that. And what he's very worried about is that this very character of open access makes it vulnerable to online viral infection and fraud. And that because of this fear, consumers will more and more opt for closed, or what he terms tethered applications that promise security. And this will be a sort of terrible fate. And who is going to save us from this terrible fate of closed or tethered applications? Well, for him, salvation lies in an army of true netizens, as he calls them, cultivating positive social norms online. The netizen is technologically skilled and can reconfigure the net's experimentalist architecture. In reality, they're networking engineers and software designers. They're expert users with time on their hands to do a bit of tinkering. And by contrast, the ordinary user is cast as passive and inadequate, with insufficient knowledge or even interest in the generative capacity of the web, simply wanting it to work efficiently and effectively, simply having an instrumental sort of attitude towards the technology. And I think what Zittrain in the end is really arguing for implicitly, not of course explicitly, is the rule by a technological elite. That's really what kind of comes through. It's of course a gendered analysis, but who am I to kind of comment on that? But it is ruled by a technological elite, and what's completely sort of missing from the book and the analysis is any sort of standard STS critique of the notion of expertise and its relation to lay knowledge, let alone the extent to which the wider public should be involved in the innovation process. And my sense is that we're not really there in that debate, and I think it's a very important place to be. So I'll just end by saying that I think this issue of the relationship between technological and design and use is at the heart of our concerns. I think we should be engaged in analyses of these technologies and be up for answering and analysing the kind of new questions that are thrown up. But I also think that what we may have to do more of than we have in the past is to give more attention to the communicative or meaning-generating capacity of these information and communication technologies. So that's a kind of challenge I'm kind of throwing out. I'm now going to hand over to my three speakers, and I very much look forward to your comments. So the first speaker is Jiyoung. Thank you very much, and I should switch this off.
Yes, please. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'm very honored to be here today, and I'd like to thank Judy for inviting me to be in this session. The title of my presentation today is Communication Ecology Perspective and the Internet in East Asia. First of all, let's start with some brief numbers that many of us are already familiar with. So this is the internet penetration rate in different continents in the world. And some of you may be slightly surprised to see the low average internet penetration rate in Asia, which is below the average of the world average. And if we see the top 4 countries in Asia with the highest absolute number of internet users, as you can expect, China is the first, and Japan follows with 78.2% penetration rate. India has high absolute number but very low penetration rate, and South Korea is fourth with 81.1%. On the other hand, there are other countries within Asia that have extremely low internet penetration rate, and this shows really like large digital divide that exists within Asia, and it also explains the low average in Asia. Going on, the household broadband penetration, South Korea leads the world with 99.5% household broadband penetration. Japan is ranked 24 with 60%, and UK and US has slightly higher broadband penetration than Japan. In terms of mobile phone penetration, again, South Korea and Japan has very high mobile penetration rate, and most of the phones are equipped with access to the internet. And mobile penetration in China is growing very rapidly. Now over 50% of Chinese people use mobile phone. So due to this kind of high penetration rate of internet and mobile phone in this region, in East Asia, many people are likely to assume that the same level of penetration rate may mean same type of usage. The actual usage will be also similar. So the question is, does similar penetration rate equals similar usage? And my answer to that is no. So let me give you some examples. This is comparison between Japan and Korea, which has very similar penetration rate. And you may recall from the earlier slide that broadband penetration in Korea was very high and Japan was lower. That is actually connected to the ways in which the internet has evolved in these two countries. First of all, in Japan, the internet really evolved in a mobile phone-centric way, that many people first started to use the internet with their mobile phone, and still mobile phone is the main way for people to get online. And related to this, very popular mobile internet activities in Japan include mobile, email, texting, and checking information like weather, movie, traffic, etc. And recently, blogging and social network services have become popular, but most of them are mostly used by mobile phone. On the other hand, in Korea, the internet really have evolved on a PC-based broadband connection. And so a lot of websites are used in a graphic-based, and the use of the internet has been quite diverse. So social network services have been very popular since late 1990s, where there weren't many social network services. And citizen journalism has been very active in Korea. So there you can see some different pattern of usage. On a more cultural side, in Japan, internet is largely viewed as a very anonymous space. The people don't feel very comfortable revealing their real names online. And even a lot of blogs and social network services are actually kept with nicknames rather than the real names. So naturally, the internet is considered to be an alternative space, which is kind of different from their offline social relationships and communications. On the other hand, in Korea, relatively speaking, internet is much more transparent space, that many people do not feel uncomfortable revealing their real name. And indeed, very popular social network site Cyworld, which has about half the population, has login names. In order to get the login name, you have to actually input your social security number in addition to your real name. And people don't feel uncomfortable doing that, so you can see kind of how people view the internet to be. And because of that kind of reason, and internet has become a very central medium in society. So in Korea, internet is not so much of alternative space, but more like a magnifying glass of offline. Offline and online are quite connected, continuous relationship. And these are just a few examples, but these differences between the two countries illustrate the social shaping of technology perspective very well, where the same technology can be used quite differently depending on government and market policy and the ways in which users view the technology. And Judy talked about the social shaping of technology, but just to give you some embarrassing story of mine is that I have been familiar with this social shaping of technology perspective since my graduate school days, mainly because one of my advisors was Bill Dutton, who is now at Oxford University Institute. And because of his influence, until very recently, I thought that social shaping of technology perspective comes from communication studies. And Judy and other people who lead this perspective, I thought they are part of communication studies, but actually it's developed and it's very important perspective in STS, so it was very eye-opening for me to know that. But actually this episode illustrates that a perspective developed in STS has actually been adopted, came to communication studies, and now it's one of very important perspectives that a lot of communication scholars use. And it shows the natural linkage between STS and communication studies. So adding on to the social shaping of technology, what I would like to suggest as a communication researcher is to study new communication technology in context of other communication media, within the communication environment. The communication environment can include mass media, television, newspaper, radio, and also very important interpersonal communication, which is a very important way for us to communicate with other people. When we study new communication technology, we tend to overemphasize, focus too much on that technology and just focus on what people do with that technology. But oftentimes that kind of perspective is likely to exaggerate the social implication of that technology. We just mainly focus on that technology. And oftentimes the actual social implication of that new technology is hard to grasp if we just focus on one technology. So I believe that we should study the internet and other new technologies within the communication environment and as one of the communication media rather than the one technology that we want to focus on. And to illustrate the point more concretely, this is what my colleagues and I call communication ecology. And this communication ecology perspective is guided by several theories from communications, which really focus on multi-level communication and cross-level communication. So if we can kind of divide the communication ecology into 3 levels, at the macro level, there are mass media, which are largely targeted to large audience. And at the meso level, there are group communications, organizational level communications, and also local media or ethnically targeted media, in which the audience is smaller and more targeted. And at the micro level, there are individuals and interpersonal communication. And obviously, the size of the communication ecology, or the size of each level, and the cross-level interaction of each level is likely to differ in different countries. Right? The communication in different countries are likely to differ, not only in different countries, but within a country, the communication ecology of each city is likely to differ. And if we can really understand the communication ecology of one place, it would be really helpful for us to try to analyze how a new communication technology comes into our society and how it is being incorporated in our society. And let me talk with an example, the internet. So where does the internet fit in the existing communication ecology? And in order to answer this, we first of all have to specify what type of internet activity we're talking about. Because the internet is a very broad, there are many different activities, and different types of activity can belong to different levels in the communication ecology. So let's say we want to focus on social network services, SNS. This is the most popular activities these days in many countries. And several scholars recently have pointed out that social network services have made it much easier for people to form groups online and to engage in group-level communication. So in that sense, SNS, use of the internet, can be incorporated into the meso level in this communication ecology. And to bring this example in a more specific context, if we look at South Korea, going back to the earlier example, I mentioned that internet is very much part of the offline relationship in Korea. So mass media actually have been paying a lot of attention to what netizens say or what's going on the internet. And recently, the social network sites, Cyworld, which is Korean, and then Twitter, which has become very popular in both Japan and Korea. In Korea, a lot of politicians and celebrities now use those social media as a mini press release place. So if they want to say something to other people, they would post something there. And mass media in Korea actually will right away pick that up and then broadcast or put that in their newspaper to the larger audience. So in Korean context, actually the relationship between meso level and macro level is very active. There are very active relationship between the two. On the other hand, maybe if we look at Chinese context, the social network services in China are also very, very active. A lot of people engage in the discussion in the social network sites. But the mass media in China are much less likely to pick up what's going on the social network site and broadcast it because of the censorship and other issues. So in that case, in China, internet is still left as a kind of more alternative space rather than being incorporated into this whole communication ecology and having a lot of interaction with macro level media. The case of Japan, a lot of you here may know better than I do, but I think before, in Japan also, the mass media didn't really report a lot about what is discussed online because the discussions were all mostly anonymous. But recently, because of the popularity of Twitter, mostly I think, the politicians are starting to use social media to express themselves, and mass media in Japan has just started to pick up what people post there to broadcast or put it in the newspaper. So actually, the Japan case is a good example of how the communication ecology evolves. It's changing, it's dynamic. It's not a static concept. In each country, the communication ecology is constantly evolving, and when we can really focus on understand the communication ecology, it will be much easier for us to kind of grasp the ways in which the new technologies are incorporated into the society. And I believe that understanding the communication ecology can help us better understand the process and to visualize the process of social shaping of technology. So on that note, I would like to stop my presentation here, and I'll be happy to discuss further. Thank you.
When they're both on together, but this is Christian Lecoq, as you can see, just setting up here.
Yes. Well, good afternoon. I'd like to tackle this issue of the argument I would make is the need for an increased convergence between SCF communication studies at the micro level that has been shown, the level of communication interactions, the level which interests me, and very much at the level of pragmatics of artifacts and communication artifacts. So, when Julie asked us to work on that, I returned to get a basis. I returned to one form of STS, which is the own actor network theory in this Latourian version. And I reconsidered, in fact, the way it treats ordinary objects. And I think it's interesting to notice that when Latour is interested in ordinary objects, he used actor network theory in a very different sense as what he does interested in innovation, in sociology of science and innovation, actually. What I think he does when he applies actor network theory to the sociology of ordinary things, sleeping policeman, key holders, door grooves, and so on, is that he uses actor network theory to articulate an account of the presence of artifacts in a situation, how they come to be there, how sleeping policemen came to be built by engineers and put on the road in France and stand as spokesmen or delegate for these now remote policemen. And he articulates that kind of account of presence with what kind of social recognizable action the sudden relevance of the sleeping policeman to a driver may do, to what that kind of artifacts do. And artifacts of sleeping policemen for him, they act through their action program. That is for him, basically a linguistic injection for drivers to slow down, not to break their cars. And he uses this nicely to show how the question of legal rule to respect the speed limit may become less salient in this translation. And I think very much the core what he does is a kind of theory of the performativity of artifacts in action, articulating how they come to be present and what they do, recognizably do as a kind of social action in the situation. Since I'm interested in how people actually use communication technology, I'm also interested in exploring another strand of research, which is pretty much separated from actor network theory, which is F2 methodology and conversation analysis. And when you look at actor network theory from that perspective, there's an immediate critique that kind of perspective that Latour is providing is an analyst's perspective. It's not necessarily the member's perspective. There's nothing in Latour to ground empirically the idea that members, drivers, actually orient to a sleeping policeman in the way he tells us they do. And so it's interesting to look at how conversationalism has analyzed artifacts, and particularly communication artifacts. And the example I want to show is early work of conversationalism by Emanuel Shegloff, which was interested in the phone ring as a kind of artifact. And he was working on summoning sequences in conversation, and his argument was that the phone ring had the sequential organization of the summons. It would run like a beep, 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 beep. It's like a repeated action that would go on for as long as no expected or proper answer or response had been obtained. And for him, that made the phone ring the equivalent of a summons, in a sense. And he used his work to show how actually people, conversationalists, phone conversationalists, actually orient toward the phone ring as a summons. What's interesting here is that Shegloff and his phone user, the one he studies, are able to treat as largely irrelevant the socio-technical assemblage which made it possible for the phone to ring in the first place. And also, they can treat all the background cultural skills that allow someone to recognize a phone ring for what it is are being taken for granted. For example, differentiating a phone ring from a doorbell, which at the start of the phone diffusion was not something which was really, really obvious. So that kind of bracketing works, and was very nice in his analysis, because it is in the 70s. It is a world in which most homes in the US have a phone, or expected to have a phone, and in which a phone ring was imposed by phone makers and relatively standardized. And this is what allows, I would argue, that kind of bracketing for his users of all the way the phone ring came to be here and to ring in the first place. It would not be the same if we look historically back at what the phone was in the 30s, which I won't do, but what the phone ring is now, which I would like to do now. Contemporary phone rings are musical ringtones, or basically any kind of audio extract that you wish to use. There are many ways to download them by SMS, websites, peer-to-peer sharing, and so on. And most interestingly, it's a very equivocal object in pragmatic terms, because it's something which retains the idea of the summon in the ring. It's a phone that rings and that expects a projected proper answer, which is to pick up a phone and speak. But it's also, for many users, a music which invites being listened to, which provides a transient musical experience. And in the study we made not just a juxtaposition. These melody-oriented users, they declare that the melody somehow compensates for the summons, which is very interesting. So here, we have a very different socio-technical network, an array of practices, which accounts for the possibility that musical ringtones will ring here and now than what we had in the 70s when Shegloff was studying how people were taking phone call and phone call initiations. And this socio-technical network, some parts of it are relevant to how people will recognize what they will do with that kind of phone ring. Not every part of that socio-technical network, the way it's been downloaded can be bracketed as largely irrelevant. But the way that it tries a dual experience, that it is both a summons and both a music, which involves two very different types of action, picking up the phone or listening to it, this can be a resource in the actual situation, and this can be observed, which I want to show you in a small extract. And this works, in which you see two people, one of them, the phone will be ringing, and perform a very skillful performance of managing the phone by relying on this duality, that the phone is both a music and the phone ring is both a music and a ring. It doesn't work. Too bad. Can I pick it up somewhere? getting into trouble. I think you have to believe my word that they really do that and really make that kind of performance. Sorry. So, to conclude, my time I think is coming to over, to an end. The use of STS is quite interesting in the way that Latter has been using it to articulate, when it's possible, an artifact, in particular communication artifacts such as a phone ring, to account for its presence and the kind of occurrence, the kind of events that its presence opens up to. And also to articulate that with what the corresponding artifact in action, you have a ring of a phone, recognizably does. And I think this is really interesting, and I try to show why there is an urgency to do more of that, to articulate that kind of performative analytical view of artifacts in action with the analysis of naturally occurring data about how people actually communicate and how they may orient to that kind of to parts or description of that kind of array of practices and social technical networks that make such events possible in the first time. And I would argue that the phone ring here is just an example. Nothing prevents us to extend such a technopragmatic perspective to any kind of communication event. And it may be urgent to do so because the current development of new media and ICT leads to forms of communication events whose heterogeneous networkness is more salient, is less easy to bracket, and is highly relevant to what they do, they are perceived to do by users. This is an example of what a user, which I was video recording, got on she was using a dating site, and what she got at some point on the site she was visiting, she got that kind of pop-up window in the middle of the screen. Basically, a pop-up window is some kind of announcement. It says somebody X is visiting you, is currently visiting your profile. But what is interesting is that even though I can metaphorically describe this as an announcement, the question of what kind of agency led to the possibility of such an event to occur is a very complex question. It's not someone which said that announcement. It's a very complex social-technical network that led to that particular announcement. And it's even more complicated if we look at all the aspects of that kind of device, that kind of notification device, because we have many voices in such a device, which are telling very different things, actually. And so to understand what these things might do, and I think it's important to have a kind of analytic reconstruction of a kind of social-technical network which make this thing happen in the first place, and because they cannot be bracketed as easily as what could be done with phone ring in the 70s. The networkness here is more salient to the actual situation of use. I think it's one good reason to explore more that very uneasy relationship between STS communication studies and between STS and situated action theories, I think. Thank you.